Hi, and thank you for joining us to learn about our research findings related to para-athletics classification. I'm Deanne Fay. I'm an international classifier with World Para-Athletics and also a professor of physical therapy at A.T. Still University in the United States. Today, I, along with my colleagues listed here, would like to present our findings on our study reference values in individuals without impairment for activity limitation tests used in para-athletics classification. I really wish we could all be together as I'd really love to discuss this more in depth with any of you. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or comments regarding this topic. So to give a little background, I'm going to scroll in so you can see here. During the classification of para athletes, classifiers use a variety of tests. And in 2018, World Para Athletics added 5 activity limitation tests to our classification procedures. These activity limitation tests include counter movement jump, side step for distance, standing broad jump, triple hop for distance, and bounds for distance. Although these tests are very useful for classifiers, there's limited information available for us to help us make evidence-informed decision regarding the performance of the athletes when they're doing this. So the purpose of this study was to determine normative values for each of the activity limitation tests in individuals without impairment, to determine if normalization by height or leg length is better for comparison, and to establish the relationship of each of these tests to sprint performance. All of this will help classifiers be able to use this information to make better evidence-informed decisions. So taking a look at our methodology, we had participants that were physically active individuals without physical impairments between the ages of 18 and 35. We ended up with 75 participants, 37 male and 38 female, with a mean age of 25 and a mean physical activity of 255 minutes a week, so a little over 4 hours of physical activity a week. Each participant's height, weight, and leg length were measured, and then following a warm-up of a jog and some static and dynamic activities, the participants performed each of the activity limitation tests along with a 60-meter sprint. Test order was randomized as well as whether they started on the dominant or non-dominant side. Participants also completed a practice trial and then 2 trials at maximum effort for each of the tests. For collecting data, we had 2 different cameras set up. One camera was set up at a distance further away to gain information from a sagittal view so that we could later look at specific distance measures as well as joint range. So you can see that here on the picture on the left from being taken from the camera further away for the broad jump. And this is a zoomed in version, but showing an athlete during a bound activity. Then there was another researcher who had a camera close up and was positioned close to where the athlete was likely to land based on how they performed in their practice trial. And that camera then captured their exact landing on a steel tape measure. And you can see that here on the picture on the left. Okay. For the counter movement jump, which you see in the middle picture, the film was done from a frontal view, and then that was imported into the My Jump 2 app to determine height. Additionally, on the sprint, it was a 60-meter sprint, but the speed was actually captured during the last 30 meters using laser timers. To assess reliability, we had 11 of the participants, or 15%, be tested twice about 1 week apart. And then to analyze the data, we use KS tests for normality, interclass correlation coefficients to establish reliability, Pearson correlations to look at relationships between the tasks, and a stepwise multiple regression analysis was completed with all tasks as candidate predictors of sprint speed. For all analyses, alpha was set at 0.05. All right, scroll up to the top here and let's talk a little bit about the results. First of all of our data was normally distributed. This top table here is showing you the activity limitation tests and their correlation with height and with leg length. You can see over here that both height and leg length were highly reliable, and all of these were significantly correlated at a p less than 0.001 level. Looking at the exact numbers, the correlations were slightly higher for height than leg length for all of the tasks other than counter movement jump, but the differences were very small, and based on this, we are supporting the use of either height or leg length for normalization. Reliability of all tasks was good to excellent with ICC values above 0.85. Data were normalized by both height and leg length, and you can see in this middle table here, the means, standard deviations, and 95% confidence intervals provided for both male and female for both height and leg length. These values will allow for comparison of athlete performance during a classification process to the norm and the normative ranges. The last analysis as part of this presentation is looking at how the different activity limitation tests correlated with speed. And we see that here in this table. This is showing the Pearson correlations for each of the tasks, looking at both dominant and non-dominant sides and their sprint speed. They were all significantly correlated, but we can see here that standing broad jump and the non-dominant side of the triple hop were the most highly correlated. We also did a stepwise regression analysis, as I mentioned, and this was looking at test performance normalized by height. And we looked at that separately related to dominant and non-dominant. And when looking at the dominant side, the broad jump and the bounds accounted for 74% of the variance of sprint speed. And for the non-dominant side, it was broad jump and triple hop that accounted for 75% of the variance. So what does this all mean for us as classifiers and classification in general? Well, first of all, the normalizing data by either height or leg length appears to be valid and reliable means for establishing norms. So classifiers may choose to normalize their athletes' performance on these activity limitation tests by either height or leg length, depending on the equipment available and the ease of measurement. And then the second thing that they can compare athlete performance to these docketed normative values, and this may help guide their understanding of the influence of the athlete's impairment on performance. Performance outside of these normative values may indicate that the influence of the impairment on the task. Further research is needed for us to really determine the exact level of deviation that is meaningful for each task, but it is a start. Additionally, some of previous literature has supported that normative values can vary a little bit depending on the sport background of the individuals assessed. So looking at normative values specific to running athletes or specific to throwing athletes may be a worthwhile endeavor in the future. And then finally, when classifying sprinting athletes, focusing on the performance of broad jump, triple hop, and bounds may be most helpful in determining the influence of impairment on sport performance. These findings are consistent with previous literature supporting that broad jump and bounds were highly correlated with sprint. That study did not have the triple hop as part of it. More research on the movement components and the symmetries in these tasks is recommended. And if you are interested in that, I would like to invite you to visit our other presentations here at this VISTA conference. We have another poster, and this is on the component analysis of broad jump, triple hop, and bounds, looking at specific joint motions that most predict the distances and may be useful for classifiers to focus on. And then a presentation looking at symmetry and consistency components of triple hop and bounds to also guide classifier decisions. So I'd like to thank you again for your time and interest in this topic. As mentioned earlier, please don't hesitate to reach out if you would like to discuss this further, have any comments or questions. My email is listed here at the bottom. It is dfay@atsu.edu, and I would really welcome any discussion with you. So thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.